Well, it makes sense to,
Sorry, yes?
when, we're just chatting to not be recording, but just it turns into a nice discussion naturally. It's hard to know when to butt in.
Well, thank you for reminding me. Okay, so now we're going to move on to page 36. It's the beginning of the second Torah portion in the book of Leviticus. It's commonly known as the portion of Tzav, which is the word at the top of the page, on the left side of the page of 36. Tzav means to command, commands, and we had that in the forward. And really, that's the first word, the first more unique word of the Torah portion. The first 5 words of the Torah portion are God spoke to Moses saying. That's a lot of Torah portions open the same way. But getting past that introductory phrase, the first word is tzav, which means to command. And again, we're talking here about offerings that were brought in the temple, and first in the tabernacle, then in the temple. And to reiterate, and it will be on point today, that these offerings were not just mechanistic formula that would take an animal or meal, a flour, whatever we're doing, or wine, and just go through some motions. There was a profound spirituality that was inherent in the process. Something that was all the offerings were meant to be very psycho-spiritual exercises. There was the actual offerings. The person standing on the side, they couldn't know exactly what's going on in your heart unless you told them. But they saw you doing something. The things we were doing were the offerings, and the offerings themselves were, in a way, an outgrowth. They were an expression of certain psycho-spiritual dynamics, or not only an expression of the dynamics, but also part of the trigger to help us reach the dynamics. Now, in a very general sense, and it's on point for today, the offerings were, as a whole, especially the ones that involved animals, they were addressing a very common human struggle, and that is the struggle we have with our own ego, our own sense of self, and our ability to be selfless or altruistic, whatever the word we choose. Because in Torah thinking, obviously, having an ego, first of all, having an ego is a healthy thing to some extent, or to a great extent. So the ego itself is part of who God created us to be. When it becomes unhealthy, when it becomes something which separates us from others, when it becomes something which shades or hazes over or obstructs some of the beauty of life, then that's an ego we need to deal with. Now, that what I'm going to call unhealthy ego is also a very common thing, because really pursuit of self and the self-indulgence, we have to be aware of what we like, what we don't like. We eat 3 times a day, and there's nothing wrong with having an appetite. At the same time, there's the idea of taking care of ourselves, which is a mitzvah. And then there's the idea of indulging ourselves, which is giving paying so much attention to ourselves that there's less room to think about what other people need. There's the idea of what I need or what I want out of the world, and then there's the idea of a consciousness of what the world needs or wants out of me. And I can balance those, but one of them is instinctively going to take up more space. And what instinctively takes up more space is, what do I want? What do I need? What do I think I need? And the Torah in Torah thinking, there is this a pretty, it would behoove us to have a pretty consistent effort to try to analyze and be self-aware of where do my interests lie right now? What hat am I wearing? Is it about, am I focusing more on what I want? And I do have to take care of myself, and I do have to be aware of my wants, I have to be aware of my feelings. But again, is that what I'm marinating in? Am I leaving space to really to feel and to be motivated by what the world needs out of me? Because the world needs something out of all of us. God put us here to make a better world, create relationships, whatever, however you put it, but to bring light to the world and bring mitzvahs to the world. And that means we have to be aware of a mission. And being aware of a mission is different than focusing on what I want. Because a mission means it's something beyond me, something above me, something that transcends me, and something that really I need to have as a beacon, a North Star, and not just set my own North Star, which is going to be self-interest, and very often. And I think we all, if we just open the papers on our internet or news on any given day, we probably will be able to find, without too much trouble, someone who got themselves into a lot of trouble, just pursuing their own self-interest, their passions, their anger, their feelings, whatever it is, without thinking about their higher responsibility. So in bringing the offering, what we're doing is the offering represented our own quote unquote animal, in the sense that that's in spiritual thinking, the animal, an animal is something we need to protect. An animal is created by God. An animal is part of the universe, and we have to be kind to animals. The Torah tells us, gentle. Same time, an animal as a being is instinctive. An animal doesn't sit and think, I really should go on a diet. It's their instinct, and if something doesn't taste good, they stay away from it. But it's all instinctive. And the human has the capacity for self-awareness and self-examination, and the capacity to rise above instinct and say, even though I really want to do that, I really want to eat that, it's really not good for me, and I'm going to delay gratification or move my sense of what gratifies me and try to modify that, because we can modify our gratification also, and sometimes time does it. There was a time in my life when pizza and a Coke was something that would have gratified me a lot. Today it's just pizza, maybe a little bit, but it's just not my taste anymore. So we when we grow, what gratifies us changes, and sometimes we find gratification, greater gratification in working in a food bank than having a good steak. And you can do both. But the idea is that it's a different type of gratification, and we look at what gratifies us. So one of the things we're going to talk here about is, because all of the offerings were this idea of our own self and self-absorption or self-orientation and often self-gratification, and trying to bring that as an offering to God and saying, I want to sublimate, I want to elevate my sense of focus on gratification and what gratifies me, and my focus on what gratifies me, because I want to leave space for what other people need from me and what will gratify them. So that's in a general sense. Of the offerings, it's a little more on point when it comes to this offering. And we begin with something which is also a little bit of a different lane, but in the same idea. When we do a mitzvah, we do something good, we should be doing something because it's good. The fact that we get benefit from it, that we feel good about it, on the one hand, that's a great thing. It's incentive. On the other hand, we also don't want to lose sight of the mitzvah idea, because mitzvah means it's a mission. It's a commandment. And if I simply love lighting Shabbos candles, and it turns me on. Or I love putting on tefillin, or I love whatever it is that I'm doing, and it's a mitzvah. Or working in the food bank. If that's what I love really, and that's my motive for going to the food bank or doing a particular mitzvah, then what I've done is I've done something for myself. It's again by pursuit of my self gratification. Now, it's a good thing. I would say that if you any of us are struggling with the fact that we selfishly want to go work in a food bank, I'd say go work in the food bank, work on yourself later. Meanwhile, help people. At the same time, I'd say yes, you want it to be a mitzvah. You want it to be about there are people in need. You want it to be about the fact that God created us, and here I'm able to spend some time doing God's work on earth and being able to help people in need, or doing God's work on earth and lighting a Shabbos candle, doing a mitzvah. And enjoy it too. But the core of it should be a recognition that this is our responsibility. And if it's purely about what we enjoy, the product may be a mitzvah. And the product is a good thing for others sometimes, and that's great, and do it. At the same time, it's important if in the privacy of our own minds, it's important to be able to analyze and say, is this about me or about others, right? If someone comes to my office today and says they want to give $10 million to build a new hospital because they want to see their name in lights, I would say give the $10 million. But if you want to talk later about your motive, would like to be able to do that, because it's not a pure motive, but please do the good thing. For a person who's searching for some sense of a grip on their own morality, doing it a mitzvah because I want my name up in lights, that's not a reason. To say I want to do the mitzvah because I want to help, and I'm also enjoying the fact that people are noticing me and saying thank you. Okay, that's good. It's that incentivizes the mitzvah. That's okay. But it's as far as it's not the motive. So when it comes to the offerings, there were a few different types of offerings, and some offerings were totally consumed on the altar. Some offerings, there would be the people bringing. If I hear I'm bringing an offering to God, I pay for an animal, it costs money, and I bring it, and then I would take home some of the meat and be able to feed my family. So there's some. I'm going through the exercise. I'm getting some personal benefit, and in many of the offerings, there would be also a portion there for the Kohen, because the Kohen were public servants. How are they supposed to feed their families? So they would there would be a piece where they could take home, and this is how they lived. What would happen in a case where everything's totally consumed? So now the Kohen has really no side benefit here. The Kohen is doing their service. They're giving in their time and their effort to help the community, to help the people who are bringing the offering. The community needs to bring the offering, or the individual, and they got nothing to take home for. One can imagine that there's less incentive, and that's a human idea. It's normal. Now, on the one hand, say, well, it's beautiful. Buckle down and do a good thing just because it's good, even if you're not getting any benefit. So for us standing on the sidelines, you could see that. And if someone's sitting in my office talking to me about it, I'd say, okay, here's an exercise to really, flex your altruism muscle and do something just because it's good, because you're not getting anything for it. And try to appreciate the opportunity and hope that the next offering is something that's coming down the pike in the next hour, you'll be able to bring home to feed your family today, tomorrow, or the next day after. But the idea of personal incentive, personal gain, when it was not there in certain wholly consumed, holy, WHO, wholly consumed offerings, there was a concern that there would be less incentive to take care of this with alacrity or properly. So we open up with that 6:1. God spoke to Moses saying, there are certain sacrificial procedures from which the priests derive little or no personal benefit, such as the ascent offerings, which are totally consumed on the altar, and the high priest's daily grain offering. This being the case, you should convey these laws to the priests with particular emphasis, impressing upon them the importance of following them conscientiously nonetheless. So, and actually, just to take one more, therefore, in transmitting these laws, do not just speak to Aaron as usual, but command Aaron and his sons emphatically. Now, the language of the Torah here is command Aaron and his sons, the Kohens at the time. There are a lot of commands in the Torah, and there are 613 mitzvahs. The language is not usually command. Let's say to them, this is what we need to do. This is what God wants. So that's it. God's wish is my command. So it says that that on Passover we should eat matzah. It doesn't say command them to eat matzah. It says on Passover you should eat matzah, and therefore that's a command. It doesn't spell out a command. A command is much more. It seems more of an urgency. Command them to do this instead of just tell them to do this. Why that added layer of urgency? Why using that word, which it doesn't come up much often at all, as far as that as framing the directive for Moses or Aaron to convey a mission, a mitzvah. The reason that this seems underscored with the more the immediacy and the urgency of command them is because there was an understanding. It seems that there's an understanding that there could be less enthusiasm in doing this mitzvah because what do I get out of it? So he says, saying, what was Moses supposed to say to Aaron and to the Kohens, Aaron and his sons? I previously taught you the procedure for sacrificing an ascent offering. They're only up to and including how you are to burn it up on the altar. It's how to do it, but then you have to bring it up on the altar, and there it would be burnt. This is the regulation regarding how you are to treat the ascent offering after having placed it on the fire atop the altar. Although after it is slaughtered, it should preferably be placed on the altar fire during the day, it remains the same valid ascent offering as long as it was placed on the fire pile atop the altar anytime during the whole night until morning, inasmuch as the fire of the altar will be burning on it through the night. Okay, so here is some nuances of Jewish law. First of all, a little Jewish fun fact, which is that on the normative Jewish calendar, the calendar day begins at night. So, for example, today's my mother's birthday. It's the 15th day of the Hebrew month of Sivan. Last night, we were wishing my mother happy birthday. Today too, but last night we were wishing my mother happy birthday, not in advance of her birthday eve. It was her birthday when darkness fell last night. When night fell last night, that was the 15th day of Sivan. If something happened that day, that last night, if we were going to put together some type of a legal contract in Jewish law, and we dated it, last night would have been the 15th of Sivan. And tonight, and now is the 15th of Sivan, and tonight will be the 16th of Sivan. If we get together and create a contract tonight at 10 p.m., we will date it the 16th of Sivan, because it begins with the night. That's why Shabbos begins Friday night. Kol Nidre Kol Nidre is not the night before Yom Kippur; it's the beginning of Yom Kippur. Now, that's normative. In temple life, when it came to offerings, it was not that way. It was the night followed the day. So the day would begin with daybreak, in other words, the temple service day would begin with daybreak and would end with the following daybreak. So when Yolanda had asked if there's offerings, if there are any days without offerings. Every day there was an offering to begin the day. That was brought in the morning because it was a new day. Even though, today I would say, what do you mean? The day started last night. The day, as far as offerings are concerned, the halachic principle is day follows night. I'm sorry, night follows day. So there was an offerings, and it wasn't there could be different time frames in which we have to get it done. So if I was bringing an offering, one of these totally consumed ones today, the preference would be that it's all taken care of and put onto the altar during the day. That would be the premium. If it's slaughtered, but we didn't get a chance to put it onto the offering, I'll say there's a traffic jam on the altar. Some days we're very busy, and there's limited space on the altar. And it came on in the night, that's fine. As long as it was all done by tomorrow daybreak. Tomorrow daybreak, it has to be all totally consumed. And that's what they're saying here. That there's the idea of just to read it, it says, it should preferably be placed on the altar fire during the day, but it remains the same valid as scent offering as long as it's placed on a fire pile atop the altar anytime during the whole night until morning. Okay. So I want to go down now. Maybe I should. Let's just finish the verse and then we'll go into the Hasidic insights. If after the animal had been placed on the altar to burn, just discovered that it should not have been designated as a sacrifice, since it was disqualified for such use even before it had been brought into the temple precincts. For instance, if it had been used in an act of bestiality. We did mention prior weeks that an animal had to be suitable. There was a designated species, sometimes a certain designated age, a time frame, and then there was an animal. It couldn't be stolen. It couldn't have moral negativity associated with it if you're bringing it for a holy exercise. And one of those things would be if a human being used it for bestiality. In other words, an animal is not evil for partaking in bestiality because an animal is just being used. But the human being is doing something wrong. And similar to what we said before about staying in our lanes. The sexual intimacy is not for something to be shared between human and animal according to Torah. We love animals, take care of animals, raise animals, and they're precious, but they're not for a sexual relationship. So, and it's considered a little bit abusive of an animal. So, what happens if we discover that an animal had been used for bestiality? Then, even before it had been brought to the temple, then it must be not be allowed to continue to burn, but be taken down from the altar. So if we find this out, once it's up there on the altar, you have to take it down. It shouldn't have gone up there to begin with. Unfortunately, something got slipped through the cracks, but it shouldn't have been up there. If, however, it was discovered that it had become disqualified solely on account of some defect that it incurred after it had been brought to the narrow precincts, it may remain on the altar and continue to burn. If it was something that happened once it came into the tabernacle precinct, in other words, into the compound, Torah say at that point, it holiness attaches. Now, even if we find out later, oh my gosh, I brought an animal bestiality victim into the animal compound, but once I brought it in, and I didn't, if it happened afterwards, something happened on the, it could have happened, something, who knows what would have gone on there. But anyway, but in the temple compound, when it came in, if it had not yet been used in that way, it achieved its holiness status, and someone did something wrong with a holy animal, but doesn't get in the way of its holiness. It doesn't take away the animal's holiness, and therefore it can continue to be an offering. It may remain in the altar and continue to burn. The same regulations, meaning that the parts of the animal must be burned up, must be placed on the altar anytime during the night, and those governing which animals it found to be disqualified may remain on the altar, apply to all animal offerings, not only to ascendant offerings. Okay. Now, having said that, let's get into the Hasidic insights. It's a long one. I don't know if we'll be able to finish it today. We could try. Said it remains valid until morning. So first we stipulate at the bottom, number 2, beneath the line. Conceptually, there are two objectives in placing an animal sacrifice on the altar to burn. A is the active objective of completing the process that began with its slaughtering, and B is the preventative objective of not letting the deadline for its burning pass. So on our to-do list, if we as a group decided to bring an offering today, as number 1, we have to get this done. And there were steps to go through. A lot of it was done by the Kohen, but we have to, it's our offering. We're on top of it. That's one thing, an active step. The other one, which may take some action from us, is making sure that it's all done by tomorrow daybreak. So this is it's two-pronged. One's active and one is more, let's say, preventative. Why is that relevant here? Because with regard to the first objective, the burning must occur during the same time frame as the slaughter, in order to express the notion that is the direct sequel to the slaughtering. If you're trying to take care of an offering, and an offering has 8, 9 steps to it, let's say, and the final step is it being consumed by flames, take care of it. And if you did everything but have it consumed by flames, you didn't bring the offering. You have to get it all done. So at one level, it's a step. One of the active steps is to make sure it's burnt. Thus, since the animal must be slaughtered by day, it must be also placed on the altar to burn by day. So what would you do? We're not to wait tonight. Get it done now. Once the day is over, this active objective can no longer be accomplished. As far as the active part of it, day's over, you can do it. Nonetheless, the sacrifice is still placed on the altar fire in order to accomplish the second objective, not to let it become disqualified from being placed on the altar to burn, which happens only the following morning. In other words, ideally, you want to get it all done by day, including the burning. If you didn't get it done, so you couldn't get all the steps done by day. But now, since the other ones were done, now it has to burn not so much as far as completing the steps, but making sure that you didn't let this linger without consumption until past the following morning. What does this mean as far as a lesson in our lives? In our personal lives, burning an animal offering on the altar expresses how we dedicate ourselves, particularly our pursuit of pleasure, which is signified by the fats placed on the altar to God. Offering up our pleasure on God's altar means transmuting self-oriented pleasure, deriving pleasure from something because of its benefits for us or for the sensual gratification it gives us, into the pleasure of doing things for God. This is, and that's why I gave a preface before, this is a central objective for each and every one of us, because we're all human and we all have sensual desires, and the ones that need appropriately to be met. The question is, should they take over our lives? And what they're talking about is sublimating some of our own pursuit of pleasure, and thinking it's not about me. I want to do something that gives God pleasure. It's like if you have a loved one, and doing something for them, doing you fill in the blank, doing gives them pleasure. So you have a choice between doing what you want to do right now or doing something that gives them pleasure. From time to time or more, you say, something, I want to give to someone who matters to me. So I'm going to not do what I want to do right now. And I'm going to take care of them, give them pleasure. Now, that itself should give us some pleasure. Hopefully that itself, that we have, we know we gave pleasure to someone who matters to us, that can be enjoyable. And that's fine, it's good. We should take the idea that we gave peace, enjoyment to someone who matters to us. It shouldn't just be a dry exercise, but what the primary thrust here is that it's something for them. And here we want to take time and look to God as a special force in our lives and do something that gives God pleasure. And I have a choice now between doing this for myself or doing that I believe as a Torah thinking person, that this is something that would give God nachas. Say, I want to, first of all, there's the surrender to doing what would give God nachas, give God pleasure. But then there's even more, is maybe to take pleasure in what gives God pleasure. Just as there are active and preventative aspects of burning of the fats on the altar, so the fats is the pleasure, symbolize the pleasure. Just as there are active and preventative aspects of burning of the fats on the altar, there are both active and preventative aspects in the process of refining our pursuit of pleasure. The active aspect is performed by day, and the preventative aspect by night. So we said that there's, by day, we have the steps to bring an offering, and by night, you can't bring the offering anymore. But what's left is to make sure that it's consumed, so it's more preventative. Make sure it doesn't overstay that time limit, because that's a problem. We're not supposed to let it linger past the next day. So that applies to the metaphor also. These two ideas, metaphorically, day signifies those aspects of our lives that are open to expressions, that are open expressions of spiritual light, divine consciousness, which would mean studying God's Torah and fulfilling his commandments. Day and night are all part of God's world, and we have day and night, and neither is inherently better than the other. But in our lives, light means something. Brightness means something. Spring and summer means something. There's a certain attitude to and an openness within nature and within the world when the sun is shining brightly. Dark is something we can't see. That's why dark is more conducive to danger, because you can't see. It's something could sneak up on you that's not going to happen during the day. So darkness, there's the concealment idea, and day is the more revelation idea. Of course, as I said, one's not inherently better than the other, and good things can happen in both, and the opposite is also true. But the idea as a metaphor, day signifies revelation, signifies that it's open and bright, and I can see. In this case, I can see the meaning in the world. I can see beauty in my life. And here we're saying through Torah and mitzvahs. Night, in contrast, signifies all other mundane aspects of our lives, whose divine dimension is obscured by the darkness of materiality. So if you think about a holy moment in your life, maybe when you're helping out a soup kitchen, you feel like the beauty of connecting with humanity. Maybe it's a time when you're in meditation or services or lighting a Shabbos candle. It's kind of an individual thing, but we can come to moments in our lives where we feel that life makes sense, and that we feel that there's peace in our lives, that there's openness in our lives, that there's revelation in our lives. Those are our day things. And then there are times which are not necessarily, I'm not even talking about the difficult times. Difficult times for sure, we can talk as a metaphor of night. But it's just the day. Nothing special going on. Nothing bad going on. I have my computer, my tuna sandwich. It's whatever it is. It's just mundane. It's just nothing special. That's darkness. What does that mean? Because in our lives, there's always something special. Our lives, life is an opportunity, a divine opportunity, an opportunity to make a cosmic difference in the world. God gave us a day. God gave us moments. God gave us capacity. Everybody has a chance for a mitzvah if they're conscious. Everybody has a chance for a mitzvah. Yeah, and it could take picking up a phone to brighten someone's life, and that's huge. So if we're not seeing it, if it looks like a blah day, in a way that means it's night. It may be day outside, but there's a concealment. There is the beauty, the world, the opportunities before me are obscured. And that's metaphorically night. Thus, the twofold obligation to place the fats on the altar fire, both during the day and the night. So we said that there's, conceptually, the fats, the parts of the animal going on the altar are going to be both day and night. But they're preferably it would be all during the day, but if not, then it's the night. But they're both times for it. And they indicate that we must transmute our self-oriented pleasure into God-centered pleasure, both when involved in spiritual pursuits, studying the Torah, fulfilling the commandments, as well as engaging in our mundane affairs. So here there's a more of a counter-intuitive angle that Hasidic thought is taking, which is that if the idea of bringing the offering consumed by the fire, that the fire on the altar was a divine fire. It represented a fiery love for God and a connection, a sense of transcendence that we have, that we want to be able to connect with something higher, something meaningful, and we're taking our pleasure pursuits and trying to consume it, and we are consuming it in this divine love because we want to take our own ego and our own pleasure focus and sublimate it and elevate it. Where's the primary exercise of the consuming our pleasure focus, the offering, is during the day. Now, during the day, we'd say is a time, we just said is a time when it symbolizes a setting or scenario when we can see the beauty in our lives, when it's a time of focus. So that's not I'm in a more spiritually strong place at that time. It's not my spiritually weak place. So you'd think that the consuming of the offering would be an exercise that focuses more on when we're spiritually weak, when we can't see, when we're feeling blah, we're feeling mundane, or maybe even more, we're feeling, that you have things in life which don't seem to be clicking, and we're feeling alone. So, but here it's the emphasis is going on the day when we're feeling good about life, when we're seeing the beauty in it. Why would that be? Thus, the fact that the main obligation to burn sacrificial fat is by day indicates, surprisingly, that our main active obligation to transmute our self-oriented pleasure into God-oriented pleasure is with respect to our spiritual pursuits, metaphorically day, rather than with respect to our mundane pursuits, which are metaphorically night, despite the fact that we would intuitively assume the opposite. The reason for the seemingly inverted emphasis is because the fact that we must replace the self-oriented pleasure we experience in our mundane affairs with God-oriented pleasure is obvious. If we do not do so, indulging in mundane pursuits will only feed our own materialism. If we are sitting and we're discussing the idea of how material self-indulgence gets us into trouble, it makes us more selfish, and it kind of dulls our senses, and and it's not good for us, our physical health. That's really a very easy conversation to have, in the sense that we all recognize that. But And we would think that. So if I told you, the Torah tells us that we're going to have an exercise today. It's called an offering, and it's going to help reorient our pleasure away from self to more of a God-focused pleasure idea of trying to do something for God. We would assume, okay, to get me off YouTube or whatever, the beer and the hockey game, whatever I'm doing, and focus on God, not away from. There's no problem with the time that I'm working in a food bank, or when I'm praying here, Shabbos morning. What is it? Why do I need help then? So with respect to our spiritual pursuits, however, we can easily delude ourselves into thinking that as long as the commandment is being performed, there's nothing wrong with enjoying its attendant benefits. I'm doing a good thing, so I enjoy it. Big deal. What's wrong with enjoying a good thing? In fact, however, studying the Torah or fulfilling its commands with self-oriented motives prevents us from fully experiencing the divine dimension of the commandments we are performing. Again, so it's very careful here. There isn't actually nothing at all wrong with you enjoying what you're doing. It's good. The question is that the motive? Really, but we want, and it's hard to be objective in seeing ourselves. What's our motive? If the motive is because this makes me feel good, do it anyway. But realize this is something that makes you feel good. Sometimes it's a pedicure, and sometimes it's feeding the poor. But it's all about you. For me to say that the pedicure is for me, but going to a food bank is me being God's agent in the world. That's different. I enjoy being God's agent in the world, good. But it's where's the focus? Where's the objective? And worse yet, it can inflate our egos no less than can indulging in material pleasures for selfish reasons. It's unfortunately very well documented and experienced that people can do really good things and then turn out to be kind of obnoxious human beings because they're so impressed with themselves that they're doing good things. Because the focus has been on augmenting self, one's own place in the world, and when it should have been more about service to the world and enjoying that service to the world, but that the focus is on service to the world. When you're focusing your energies on service to the world, you're likely not going to be obnoxious to the world because you respect the world enough to be able to be service to them. If it's about me building myself in a way that services the world and gets me attention from the world or whatever our financial benefits from the world, then the world is just a bystander to the game of my life, and I'm probably may not feel as compelled to be nice to the world because it's all about me anyway. Special care, therefore, must be taken to ensure that our motives remain pure. True, if we are not yet spiritually mature enough to hold ourselves to the ideal, then the performance of the is the main thing. And one should always occupy oneself with the Torah and its commandments, even when not for their own sake, since by doing so, not for their own sake, one will come to do so for their own sake. This is a Talmudic principle. As much as we would love, as Torah thought would love that all of us are doing good things for the sake of doing good things and doing God's work and doing for each other. The reality is that the way we operate, of course, there's self. So the question is, how much of it? So we can work with ourselves to try and get to a place where we're doing things for higher purpose. But for instance, kids are going to have a much harder time with that. And so kids, you incentivize them. Say, here's, you study this we do it, and we're going to have a class trip at the end of the year, or we're going to have these prizes or this party, which is totally fine, because you need to incentivize a child, and you want to make them feel good about themselves, and you want to make them feel good about the pursuit. But at a certain point, we grow out of the childish need and we want to do the right thing because it's right, not because we get punished if it's wrong, or we're going to get rewarded if it get punished if we do it this way, or rewarded if we do it that way. It's about being who God created us to be. If someone will sit in my office and talk about doing something the right thing or staying away from the wrong thing. And the only thing that can convince them is presenting for them a self-serving motive, I'll do it. If that's what works, listen to it. Because the main thing is I want them to do the right thing. And at this point, that's the only thing that we're going to do it. But hopefully, the person would come to a point where they appreciate what they're doing and do it without the motives, without the need for benefit, because it's not about them anymore. It's about devoting their lives to something meaningful. Furthermore, since once our motives have been purged of egocentricity, the Torah itself bids us to appreciate the benefits inherent in following its dictates, as we already discussed at length, referring to something that we probably studied a year or two ago. But the idea is that you want people to be excited about a mitzvah. You want them their humanity to feel the mitzvah. You want them to feel to appreciate not just a surrender. I'm going to a food bank because I'm going to be a good human being today. I'm going to be a good Jew today. I'm surrendering to God. I'm going to feed poor people. That's nice, very nice, because you're bringing God into your life. But why shouldn't you appreciate the fact that there are human beings, no less human than you, who bleed like you, who have loves like you, who have fears like you, and they're in need, and you're helping them? There's something deficient if you're not feeling the human beauty of it also. The question is, the level of where the motives are. And to say that someone feels good leaving a food bank is geweldig, it's beautiful. You should. And then maybe if they feel good, they'll probably go back. Did they go there to feel good, or did they go there to do a mitzvah? That's really the question. To go there to do a mitzvah and feel good that you did the mitzvah, that's the picture as it should be. On a deeper level, day and night are metaphors for times of spiritual light and darkness. Inspirational lethargy, respectively. During periods of daylight, when our divine soul shines openly, transmuting self-oriented pleasure into God-oriented pleasure comes naturally, following smoothly, almost automatically, the overall subjugation of our human-animal nature, the slaughter of the sacrifice that we engage in while in this state. I'll just finish a little more, and then we'll talk about it. All the pleasure we experience during these times, whether in divine pursuits, studying Torah and fulfilling God's commandments, or in mundane pursuits, is God-oriented, fulfillment of King Solomon's injunction to know him in all your ways. When we're in a more enlightened place and feel good about living in God's world and feel good about our lives and feel in touch with our souls, it's not as difficult. It becomes life. We're living for God. I'm living in God's world. I'm living a good day God gave me, and I'm having my breakfast or my lunch, or spending time with the loved one, or we're going out for coffee. It all fits in. It's easier to fit into that rubric because we're more consciously aware of the context of God's world, and we can connect with God, and we're recognizing, as we say, the verse says, "Know God in all your ways." That's not only that during prayer or at a food bank or doing something inherently more religious or service oriented that we're going to feel connection to God. It could be in our own lunch. But if we're in that mindset, there's nothing. Our lunch can be a holy exercise. Depending on how we go about it, and the fact that we eat like a mensch, and that we're hoping to use that strength to make a better world and go forward and do something meaningful with our day. During periods of night, however, when we lose contact with our divine soul, we must consciously ensure that we engage in both our spiritual and mundane affairs only for divine purposes. In the words of the Mishnah, let your deeds be for the sake of heaven, on to 37. So when we're not in a spiritually inspired place, it becomes more difficult because we're experiencing a night, and to be able to see the holiness in what we're doing and to feel that this is for God, even when we're doing a mitzvah, it's not as simple. So despite the obvious superiority of day consciousness over night consciousness, it is by answering the challenge of nighttime more than that of the day that we usher in the light of the morning. And this is also it's a Torah ideal, but it's more a Hasidic emphasized ideal. There's beauty in the struggle. And to God, when we are not feeling inspired, when it's more nighttime in our lives, and we're not feeling the connection, and we go and we say, but still, I have a soul, and I read something online, or whatever it is, that I want to try and bring godly connection to my life, and therefore I'm going to do this mitzvah, reach out and up the godliness quotient of my life. That's more powerful than when we do it when we're in an enlightened place. This is because in order for us to direct our thoughts to God when we are uninspired, we must call upon our deeper currents of spiritual connection to Him. Revealing these otherwise hidden spiritual potentials redeems us from our own nights, our personal exiles, thereby hastening the true and final messianic redemption. So this is a lesson found, and again, I think it's emphasized more in Hasidic writings, that there is the idea of struggle, and spiritual struggle is built in to our existence, and it's not a reflection on anything negative. It's an opportunity, because when we are able to push back against the darkness and find our own spiritual light, that's especially beautiful, more than if we were innately in a more enlightened place. And just comes to mind is that when Moses was on Mount Sinai, it says at one point that he fell on his face. And the Medrash says he fell on his face in awe, in humility. And one of the rabbinic interpretations of that is that he was able to see the future. There are a bunch of different things that are about God giving visions of the future, how Judaism would unfold, Torah would unfold. And he saw people like of our generation, and where they didn't have the benefit of a lot of different factors which guide them to a place of spiritual connectedness and enlightenment. We have to actually search for it, because there's so much around us that just there's so much materialism around it. Thank God, and we have so much freedom not to do those things. We can do whatever we want them. Therefore, why do we have to turn to connection with God? Who's God? Where's God? And when Moses was able to prophetically see how people would search for connection in their lives despite the obstacles, he fell on his face in awe and humility, because he was an enlightened guy. He didn't have that struggle, and the beauty of that struggle awed him. So we'll leave this here unless there are any questions. Once. Okay, I wish everyone a great week.
Thank you.
Very well,
Thank you.
bye.